we live in an unbelievably violent world, and I don't know that we are grappling with it effectively by hiding these facts as much as I think we are.
Hello and welcome to The Interview, our weekly podcast featuring conversations with top figures in media and politics. I'm Aidan McLaughlin, your co-host and the editor-in-chief of Mediaite.
And I'm Diana Falzone, a senior reporter at Mediaite. For this week's episode of The Interview, we are joined by CNN anchor Jake Tapper. Jake anchors the lead on CNN, which now occupies a 2-hour stretch. He's also CNN's chief Washington correspondent, and he's the best-selling author of 6 books. His latest is the 1970s fiction thriller called All the Demons Are Here.
Jake Tapper, thanks so much for coming on the show. I know this is a really busy week in news, but thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
So the major news this week is, of course, the outbreak of violence in Israel, where Hamas launched a terror attack that has so far killed more than 1,000 people, many of them civilians. Israel is now launching a siege in Gaza in response with its own horrific death toll. When you saw this news over the weekend and into this week and thought about how you were going to cover it on your show, what was the sort of overall understanding that you think that we should have about this conflict?
Well, I've been covering this conflict for a long time, and I guess there are two different parts of it. One is there is what happened Saturday, and that distinct event, and then separate and apart, almost in a way, is the stepping back and the greater context of the conflict. But Saturday is an historical event. It is, first of all, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It was almost entirely purely terrorism, acts of terror carried out against a civilian population, things that are in many ways too horrific to even describe in news media. Some of the events, and many of them we don't even know because of how many people were killed, and also because of the hostages that have been taken. So there is almost a moral clarity to what happened on Saturday. Not almost. There is a moral clarity to what happened on Saturday that is separate and distinct from whatever nuances and complications and historic issues there are with the larger Arab-Israeli conflict or Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Right. So that's one. Whatever. I mean, for instance, the BBC does not even use the word terrorism to describe anyone, much less Al-Qaeda, much less Hamas. But I don't even think there's a debate, or at least in my view, there is not a debate about these acts that were taken on Saturday against civilians, against babies, against grandmas, against people that were just sleeping in their beds at home. So that's one. And then two, separate and distinct from that, is like now what happens, which is this war between Hamas and Israel. And I think, as opposed to previous wars, there is this. I think that the attack on Saturday has almost changed. Again, not almost. The attack on Saturday has changed the paradigm, I think, for many in Israel, in the foreign policy community, et cetera, about Israel's response. Whereas in 2014, for example, when there was escalating violence between different communities, Jewish and Palestinian, that led to horrific acts of violence against Palestinians, against Jews, against Israelis, that resulted in innocent Israelis being killed, innocent Palestinians being killed, and hundreds of people being killed in that conflict. There were questions about whether Israel's response was disproportionate to what the Hamas had done. And I think that the attacks on civilians in Israel were so beyond the pale, there is, at least when you hear people on Capitol Hill talking, or people in the Biden administration talking about it, there isn't really much debate about whether they feel Israel has a right to destroy Hamas, whether or not there is, whether or not the United States would be called upon to do anything other than destroy a terrorist government right next door that would carry out such an attack. Mm-hmm. So I think that there, and then we can have that secondary, larger conversation about the horrific conditions that the Palestinian people have been living under in Gaza and the West Bank, and how the Israelis and the Israeli government have been dealing with the West Bank and Gaza. And those are important conversations and absolutely connected to the story. And I don't want to pretend that they're not, but those two other stories are, I think, more immediate.
Your colleague, Abby Phillip, urged her followers on Twitter to not look away from some of the graphic videos and reporting we've seen on this. You had an interview with an Israeli woman whose grandmother was murdered by Hamas, and then a video of her killing was uploaded to Facebook. How important do you think it is for the media to tell those stories and show the full extent of the violence?
So this is an issue that I think a lot of journalists have been grappling with for decades. In fact, I wrote a book about Afghanistan that came out in 2012, so 11 years ago. And at the front of the book, I had a page about this because I grappled with how graphic to be just in writing, in description, not even images, with what happened in the battles that dealt with this one outpost. How detailed should I be when describing how an American soldier died? And I can, in my brain, I'm thinking about one particular death, and thinking about his wife reading it.
Right.
And I ultimately decided to hold back some details, but not many, because I generally think that we in the media, and I'm talking about everyone, and I'm talking about worldwide. I think that we err on the side of not showing. And I understand the reasons for it. I'm not unsympathetic to them. We want to be sensitive to the viewer. We want to be sensitive to the reader. We want to be sensitive to the listener. Sometimes just hearing these acts is heartbreaking and traumatic. We don't want to be rude to the victims or their families. Sometimes it can be viewed as exploitative or sensational. I described a rape victim the other day, and I think that just describing it might have been something that brought the National Security Council spokesman Admiral Kirby to tears, because I think he'd seen the same video. And I wasn't trying to be sensationalistic, but somebody accused me of being sensationalistic. I wasn't trying to be. The image just stuck with me. It was a woman whose pants were stained, and it occurred to me later that they were stained because she'd been raped repeatedly, probably. And so I get all the concerns, but I just generally think we censor too much. And I understand why we do, but I just think that people would make more informed decisions if we shared more, whether it's about violence in the United States or violence abroad. And maybe there are, maybe it's like after 9:00 p.m. we show more, or, maybe there are ways that we can, as a society, do it. Or maybe we have a section of the newspaper or, whatever. But I just think that there needs to be some sort of adult way we can deal with these issues, because I don't think that we live in an unbelievably violent world. And I don't know that we are grappling with it effectively by hiding these facts as much as I think we are. So that's a long answer.
Right. And I think also, conflicts abroad that maybe don't necessarily get the same amount of coverage as this
Totally.
one.
Yeah.
Americans have no idea how horrific they can be because the American media might not be showing it as much. So I agree. I do think it's important.
Yeah. Well, and think about the fact that we don't necessarily see the humanity in other people because they don't look like us.
Right.
When they're the same as us, they're separated from us by like 0.00001% of DNA or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And, anyway, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You had an incredible interview yesterday with a Palestinian American woman trapped in Gaza with her 3 young children. She said there was nowhere for her to go, and you could hear the airstrikes throughout your interview with her. You made an appeal to the White House to help to get her out during the interview. Have you heard from the White House or gotten any updates on that, Jake?
I did hear from the White House. A little confession that that was a pre-taped interview a few minutes before the show aired. And so I said all that. And then because I couldn't wait any longer, I sent her information to the White House ahead of time after I did the interview anyway. And then after it aired, somebody from the White House reached out to me, somebody who I had not sent the information to already. And I said, I already sent it to X and Y and Z. And so I don't have an update about her well-being. And I imagine that there are a lot of Palestinian Americans, and I imagine that there are a number of them who are trapped right now, who, it's not really very easy to come and go in Gaza anyway, much less, after there's a sneak attack and all of a sudden it's really tough to come and go. My understanding, based on just something that the National Security Advisor said at a press briefing on Tuesday, is that they are working with the Israelis and the Egyptians on trying to get some sort of escape route for the innocent civilians who are in Gaza. I guess the expectation being that the people in Hamas who want to fight are going to stay and fight. I suppose I don't really have a line into their thinking, but no updates yet. But I mean, certainly the humanity of the innocent people who have been killed is not, or who are under threat, is not unique to the Israelis, even though they were the ones who were, primarily victimized or only victimized on Saturday.
Right. I mean, we've seen Americans in Israel who are having trouble getting out now. So because how hard it is for Americans. All
the airlines are canceling flights.
Yeah, and your interview demonstrated that Israel's claim that civilians in Hamas can shelter either in the south of the Strip or by the shore is not necessarily true or helpful to the people there. And there are more than 2 million people in Gaza. Are you worried about the next phase of the conflict? And what are you looking for to report on as we move into that phase? Yeah,
I mean, look, I don't want innocent people to die anywhere, just as a human. I also recognize that Israel is in a unique position where, I mean, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, thankfully that's not my job. I mean, I ask the questions. I don't know what I have been asking. I asked both the chair and the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, obviously Israel's going to respond to this. How do they do it and not kill innocent people? The Israeli Defense Forces say Hamas is embedded within the population. IDF says they do it on purpose. So how do they target and not kill innocent people? Obviously we've seen the images from Gaza and innocent people have been killed. I mean, all I can do as a journalist is report on it. And I don't think an innocent child killed is an innocent child killed. I mean, that's how I look at it.
Right. I'm curious what you make of coverage that we've seen in the last couple of days from some journalists. I think primarily it's been on MSNBC that people have been focusing on it, who have sought to put the violence into context by giving the history of the conflict, which is something you noted at the top there, that is an important thing to look at. But critics of that coverage have argued that doing so blames Israel for the atrocities that were inflicted on its people by Hamas over the weekend. What do you make of that debate about where context has a place when reporting on this news?
I mean, there is a context to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but I don't think there's any justification for killing babies and raping women. I mean, there are rules of war, and civilian populations and targeting civilian populations with war crimes are not part of that. Now, people can say, well, the Israelis do this or the Israelis do that. And, I've certainly asked tough questions of Israelis, and, I can point people to those interviews if they want, but that's not the point. This isn't a playground argument. This is, 1,000 Israelis, most of them civilians, being targeted and slaughtered. And there's no context that justifies that. There just isn't. And, I'm all for historical context in terms of larger coverage of a larger war. But I don't think when bodies are still warm, that in the most horrific act of violence against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, I think that stepping back at that moment, I think you run the risk of seeming as if you are trying to justify something that I am guessing nobody was actually trying to justify. And right. And so these things have to be covered very, very. Look, all acts of violence against civilians need to be covered in a very, very sensitive way to the civilians. And there's always going to be time for context in terms of larger issues. But like, one of the things that is not helpful is to blame civilians for acts of their government. I mean, there was plenty of time, weeks and months after 9/11, to talk about the United States and its role in the world. But that never justified anything that happened to the innocent people killed on 9/11. It might have been relevant in some geopolitical way for a discussion far, far down the road. It certainly was not something that anybody wanted to talk about on September 12th.
You make a very good point.
Does that make sense? I mean,
I think it does. Yeah, I think it does.
Makes sense. Looking about the news gathering as this horrific event happened on Saturday, you're on X, the platform once known as Twitter, which has always been a place to get footage and real-time info on
well, it was.
Well, yeah, and the platform has obviously changed enormously since Elon Musk took over. What do you think of Twitter as this conflict was unfolding? Was it still a useful news gathering tool?
No. The changes that Elon Musk has made, with all due respect, have made it a worse source of information. He has taken away the verification of credible news sources that are vetted. He has boosted unreliable sources of information, both through the purchase of blue checks and also by personally vouching for unreliable sources of information, some of whom are unrepentant bigots. One of the first things he did was boost a source that was openly anti-Semitic, that would call people Jew in a pejorative way. A tweet that he later untweeted but never said anything else about. We saw plenty of video of, from wars past, not even Middle East wars. I think there was like some demolition of a building in China that was like purported to be from Gaza. No, he is. I mean, look, social media, news media is not perfect, period. But there is at least an attempt.
Checks and balances too, and accountability.
Yes. Social media is even farther from perfect than news media. But the changes that have been made have made X far, far less reliable than it used to be. And that is a real shame. And look, I went into the Musk experiment with an open mind. I think he is I am not anti-Elon Musk, like as a knee-jerk position. I think he has done fascinating things with electric cars. I think SpaceX is interesting. He's not actually a free speech advocate, but I have a knee-jerk interest in free speech as an idea. I think executing it without it becoming a cesspool is a different thing. But I've been really disappointed because it's just like Twitter was much, much better 2 or 3 years ago. And like, I saw plenty of problems with the old regime. And like, I heard a lot of the complaints from conservatives and agreed with many of them, but it's hard to look at it now and think it's better. It's not. It's worse. And especially at times like this, there really just isn't a social media platform to go to where you can find reliable information. Threads is probably the best, but like, I just find its interface not as good.
Right, and it doesn't have the central mass. It doesn't have.
I still don't even understand what I'm following or who.
Right, exactly.
I'm reading tweets from people I don't know and I don't like.
No. Yeah,
I stopped following this person like 10 years ago on Twitter. Why am I seeing? Yeah,
but no, I'm consistently shocked by the low quality of the accounts that Elon Musk boosts on Twitter. They are almost always accounts that post false information more than anything. It's crazy. And it means that my like For You tab is just absolutely wrecked. I mean, it's useless. No,
it's awful. And yeah, I mean, look, let's just put it this way. He is not to social media what he is to space exploration and electric vehicles. And I wish he were.
Now, one of the most valuable things about CNN, speaking of a good source of news on something like this, is that CNN has always had, and it currently has, I think, the mightiest international reporting operation of many of the news outlets, certainly of cable news networks.
Yeah,
and that means
BBC. I don't think of American rivals. I don't think it's even close.
Yeah. And so that means that when a major conflict like this one breaks out, we get incredible reporting from the ground about what's going on. But as you know, speaking of the industry, cable news is in a tough spot right now. The future viability of the model is a big question. Are you worried about a place like CNN being able to sustain a robust international news operation in the future?
I'm not, because of two reasons. One, it is so much a part of our DNA and such a vital part of who we are. And Sir Mark Thompson, our new boss, comes from the BBC and is a newsman through and through and understands that we are this. This is such a vital part of who we are. And we're not going to survive to whatever we become in the next incarnation or in the new world by cutting all those bureaus, because that's when we are our most vital. At times like this, at times like the war in Ukraine. So that's one. And two, because of Sir Mark Thompson, because he is the guy to get us onto the next, as the plate tectonics are shifting, he is the person that knows how to do that. That is his jam. He got the New York Times. Yeah, right. He got the New York Times from paper to digital without screwing the paper, with going to the paper people and saying, we're not getting rid of you. We'll do whatever we need to keep you thriving. Don't worry about that. But we need to also do this. And so the fact that he is in charge makes me think, okay, good. We have somebody who understands that. I don't see any, it's not as though anyone else is doing it better. Or anyone else has figured it out. I'm glad we have our captain of our ship to take us to where we're going. And he's the right one to do it. So we'll get there. And if anyone's going to figure it out, it's him.
Right.
You seem to have an optimistic view. Jake, you broke a major scoop last week. John Kelly, former White House chief of staff, finally confirmed publicly a 2020 report from The Atlantic that said Trump, who was president at the time, made derogatory remarks about military veterans. At the time, the sourcing of the report was unknown and the Trump White House denied it. Why do you think Kelly came forward now? And why did he wait so long to confirm this reporting that the White House and a lot of people in conservative media outright denied as false?
I can only speculate, but my speculation would be that he was very reluctant to do so publicly because, as a former general, he's very reluctant to criticize a commander in chief publicly, and I would think that why he did it is because of the discussion about executing General Milley, that was just a last straw. And I had been trying to get him to go on the record for quite some time with his views, as had, I'm sure, lots of journalists. And I think maybe I just got him at the right time. And he was just so upset because he not only saw what former President Trump said about Milley as beyond the pale, but he saw it as a call from Trump, as he makes clear in the statement, a call from Trump for one of his followers to act on the call for an execution, for an assassination. Basically, that's what he saw it as. So I think that was just so upsetting that he went on the record.
And what do you think? I know you talk to a lot of these people. What do you think it says about Trump that so many of the people that served in his administration, including very well-respected generals like John Kelly, are warning that Trump is a danger to the country? And does that make you concerned about what a second Trump administration would look like?
Well, I mean, I think the question answers itself in terms of what does it say about Trump?
Right.
What does it say about a Hollywood celebrity if 10 of his ex-wives accuse him of beating them up? I mean, do I have to answer that question, really? I mean, like it says what it says.
I think it's less obvious to a lot of people than it should be. I
mean, and in terms of what are my concerns for a second Trump term? I mean, I think that just stating facts, we hear from any number of former Trump administration officials that they are concerned that Trump would try to destroy democratic institutions and democratic norms and indeed democracy itself. I mean, that's what they are saying. My opinion doesn't even matter. People who know him well, who worked with him, from Cassidy Hutchinson to Attorney General Barr to Mark Esper to General Kelly. I mean, they're the ones whose opinions matter, and they're stating it very clearly what they think it would mean. What I have said before is it's called the American experiment. It's not called the American proven theorem. It's an experiment. We will see if it works. Right now, it's being tested. I don't know that it's going to work. I mean, there were a lot of election deniers who made it clear that they did not respect democracy and the idea of the person with the most votes wins the election on the ballot in 2022. And in the battleground states on the statewide level, they lost. But in individual races in congressional districts, they won. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it says Congressman Steve Scalise wins the GOP nomination for House Speaker. That's what it's Wednesday right now as we tape this. It's 1:32 p.m. Eastern time. And that's what the news is. And, Jim Jordan was discussed as, maybe he was going to win the speaker race. And he certainly was. Liz Cheney, Congresswoman Liz Cheney was warning that he was a, major conspirator when it came to trying to overturn the election. And he would be a real danger. But Steve Scalise also spread the election lies and voted to disenfranchise the voters of Pennsylvania and Arizona. So, he was insurrection-ish. That's where we are.
That's
tough time for the party.
Yeah, it's troubling times in our world and stateside as well. Jake, thank you so much for your powerful insight and your reporting. And thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much. Anytime.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Interview. Please subscribe to The Interview on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube. And check out coverage of our conversation with Jake Tapper on Mediaite.com.